Welcome, listener. You are about to enter a place where logic takes a nap, and only the most unnecessary questions stay awake. Tonight's useless thought is simple. Why don't fish use umbrellas? It sounds silly, maybe even meaningless, but that's exactly why it's perfect for bedtime. Because nothing helps the mind relax like chasing an answer that never needed to exist. In the beginning, there was only water. Not a drop of land, not a whisper of dryness. Just endless, quiet, slightly confused water. And in that infinite sea, something tiny moved. A small, slippery creature with no job, no rent, and no concept of what land could possibly be. That creature became the first fish. And from that moment onward, the world was wet forever. Fish have spent millions of years completely soaked, surrounded by dampness, wrapped in liquid destiny. They sleep wet, eat wet, dream wet. And yet, through all that history, not a single fish has thought, maybe I should get an umbrella. Humans, of course, adore umbrellas. We open them at the first hint of rain, guarding our hair, our phones, our fragile pride. We fear getting wet the same way cats fear bathwater. But fish, they have no such worries. Their hair is imaginary, their phones are non-existent, and their dignity swam away the moment they discovered shiny hooks with worms attached. Scientists have spent centuries ignoring this question, which, honestly, is fair. But if they had cared, perhaps we would have a department of aquatic fashion today. Historians claim that the first prehistoric rain fell gently upon the ocean's surface, and the fish, curious, looked up. Then they looked down again and went on with their soggy lives, for fish cannot talk, and even if they could, their only comment would have been, "Oh, more water." You see, the ancient sea had no weather forecast. It was always raining, always moist, always the same temperature of slightly uncomfortable. For fish, rain was as redundant as putting a fan inside a tornado. The ocean was already wet enough. But among the early fish, there were dreamers. A few rebellious young fins imagined something greater. A world where fish could finally stay dry, just for a moment. They called themselves the Dry Fin Society. Their goal was bold: invent the first waterproof bubble. They worked day and night collecting seaweed, air, and enthusiasm. Every prototype popped instantly. Turns out waterproof bubbles underwater make about as much sense as waterproof tea. The movement dissolved, literally. Aquatic innovation drowned before it began. Yet, in some coral caves, there are stories of the last surviving member of that society. A philosopher fish who whispered, "Perhaps dryness is the true illusion." Moments later, a shark ate him, and thus ended the first and last age of underwater thinking. Philosophers on land have often tried to approach the same mystery. Aristotle ignored it completely. Newton avoided it, preferring to drop apples instead of umbrellas. And Einstein, when asked about it in a dream someone probably invented, smiled and said, "That's not physics. That's stupidity." But sometimes stupidity hides truth. And the truth is this: fish don't need umbrellas because they have evolved beyond the illusion of dryness. To a fish, being dry is terrifying. Imagine you suddenly deciding to breathe salad. That's how absurd dryness feels to them. They are creatures of flow, of drift, of endless wetness. Rain doesn't bother them. It's simply the sky trying to join the ocean again. Still, if you listen closely to the whispers of the tide, you might hear an old legend. A story about one salmon, brave, foolish, determined. He wanted a roof, not a coral cave or a rock's shade, a real roof. He collected seaweed shingles, shell walls, and a starfish doormat. He built and built, believing he could outsmart the water itself. Then the tide came in, and his masterpiece turned into soup. His effort dissolved, and his name faded into a single bubble. That bubble rose, popped, and was forgotten. But maybe that's the point. Water always wins. So fish stopped trying. They accepted their soaked fate. They gave up on umbrellas, on dryness, on resistance. They realized that to fight wetness is to fight existence itself. And so they float, peacefully, eternally, in perfect damp acceptance. On land, we still struggle. We run from rain, cover our heads, shake our coats dry, and curse the sky for doing what it has always done. Fish must watch us sometimes, thinking, they live surrounded by air, and yet they're still afraid of a little water. To them, we are the wet dream of irony. If a fish could write poetry, it would be short, slippery, and probably unreadable. Something like, water above, water below, my world is wet, and that's all I know. No editor would publish it, but the meaning would be clear. Accept the wetness of life. In a way, fish are the masters of peace. They never complain about humidity, never panic when it rains, and never try to stay dry. They float, they glide, they exist. No resistance, no umbrellas, no problems. Just bubbles, silence, and an occasional shark. And maybe that's the secret to their calm. Fish don't chase comfort, they dissolve into it. They don't ask the universe for better conditions. They adapt until every condition feels natural. They have no word for inconvenience, because every inconvenience is already part of the water. They are, in a sense, enlightened blobs with fins. So perhaps tonight, as you sink into your pillow, you can learn something useless from them. Not about science or biology, but about surrender. To stop running from the little storms in your head, to let thoughts fall like rain and simply drift within them. The fish do not struggle against wetness, just as you do not need to struggle against rest. Let it come. Let it surround you. Let it be your ocean. Somewhere deep beneath the surface of imagination, the first fish still swims. He does not know what land is, what dryness feels like, or why you're lying in bed listening to this nonsense. He only knows one thing. When you live in water, you do not fear the rain. You simply let it fall again and again until the noise fades into the quiet sound of forever. Because when you are made of water, surrounded by water, and occasionally drinking your own relatives, staying dry isn't a goal. It's a fantasy. And that, dear listener, is why fish don't use umbrellas. After the great failure of the salmon architect, something quietly shifted deep within the ocean. It wasn't a revolution or an awakening or anything as grand as that. It was more like a slow, slippery thought that wobbled through the water and refused to go away. Fish began to wonder, not about life, not about the meaning of existence, but about appearance. They had already accepted the simple truth that umbrellas were useless. But vanity never dies, not even 6,000 feet underwater. It began, as all unnecessary movements do, with a single goldfish. One day, while floating lazily near the surface, it saw its reflection in a passing bubble. It blinked, tilted its head slightly, and thought, "I look average." That one dangerous idea triggered what later became known, by absolutely no one, as the aquatic fashion movement. For 7 glorious minutes, the ocean became a runway of confusion. Jellyfish wore sand. Crabs tried on pearls they didn't pay for. A squid attempted to invent pants, then immediately regretted having so many legs. Even a shark experimented with seaweed hats, though none survived long enough to explain why. The water sparkled with absurdity. Tiny bubbles of self-esteem floated up, bursting instantly upon contact with logic. But for those 7 short minutes, fish truly believed they were beautiful. And then, as all trends do, it ended abruptly, not with applause but with plankton sneezing. Still, something from that chaotic moment survived. A new rumor drifted through the coral corridors. The possibility of bringing back the umbrella. Not as protection, but as fashion. To carry an umbrella underwater would not mean I fear rain. It would mean I fear nothing, not even irony. The idea spread like gossip in a small village. Soon, across the ocean floor, whispers began about a secret group. A group so mysterious that even the fish inside it weren't sure they existed. They called themselves the Dry Dreamers. The Dry Dreamers were bold thinkers, devoted to the impossible art of staying dry in a place where dryness was illegal. They met at night near coral structures shaped suspiciously like folding chairs. Attendance was optional, mostly because everyone kept forgetting. There were pufferfish philosophers, stingrays with deep opinions, and one octopus who claimed to be an influencer long before the concept of influence had been invented. Their leader was a wise old turtle named Dr. Shelbert T. Moist. He wore no shell polish, spoke in dramatic pauses, and introduced himself as Doctor, despite having no degrees except in slowness. Dr. Moist believed that fish didn't need umbrellas to stay dry. They needed them to feel important. He called it emotional waterproofing. His followers nodded thoughtfully, not out of understanding, but because they couldn't blink. Under Dr. Moist's leadership, experiments began once more. They tried shells, bubbles, and even upside-down jellyfish. One daring anglerfish proposed an umbrella made entirely of light, which immediately attracted predators. Another fish tried to craft a canopy from starfish, who were told to just hold still. They didn't. The ocean, amused, sent strong currents to mock their effort. Each time a new design appeared, a wave arrived to remind them who was boss. Rain fell above, but underwater, dryness drowned repeatedly. The dream collapsed again and again, and yet the fish persisted. Because persistence is the last refuge of stupidity and genius alike. Meanwhile, above the surface, human historians, always eager to misunderstand things, began finding strange round objects near coral reefs. Some claimed these were ancient umbrella handles, crafted by forgotten marine civilizations. Others insisted they were just trash. The debate was televised on a channel that doesn't exist, hosted by a dolphin who kept interrupting everyone with facts. As centuries passed, the Dry Dreamers faded into legend. But legends, as everyone knows, are just memories wearing costumes. Every drop of rain that touches the sea, some say, still carries the laughter of those early inventors. The pufferfish poets, the jellyfish designers, the overly ambitious octopus who believed fashion could defeat physics. Yet, in the deeper trenches where sunlight visits only on Thursdays, a few fish never gave up. They kept dreaming of umbrellas blooming underwater like metallic flowers, of rainfall that didn't just fall but saluted them. These dreamers were mocked, of course. Every revolutionary idea begins as a joke told by the sensible. But they didn't care. They knew progress begins with a bad idea, and no idea in all creation was worse than an underwater umbrella. Some modern scholars, clearly unemployed, argued that the reason fish don't use umbrellas isn't scientific at all. It's cultural. They called this philosophy wet stoicism. It teaches that all pain, including moisture, must be embraced. To hide from the rain is to admit defeat to the weather. A true wet stoic fish swims into a storm and says nothing because, again, fish can't talk. Still, the message of wet stoicism spread. Fish began to see rain as art and water as wisdom. One ancient scroll, discovered then immediately lost again, contained a mysterious line. He who fears the rain fears himself. No one knows who wrote it. Some claim it was a dolphin. Others say it was a very philosophical bubble that briefly resembled handwriting. But the meaning, or lack thereof, survived. Fish don't resist nature. They are nature. They don't fight the current. They flow with it. They don't shelter under umbrellas because to do so would be like wearing sunglasses at midnight. Technically possible, spiritually ridiculous. Still, there's beauty in their failure. Each attempt, each soggy experiment, each popped bubble of hope left behind a single thought. What if we tried again? And though the ocean forgets easily, each wave erasing the last, each fish forgetting the question, somewhere in the deep blue silence, a faint echo remains. It hums through the coral like a half-remembered dream, the time when fish believed they could outsmart wetness itself. It didn't work, it never could, but it gave them something precious, the illusion of ambition. And that illusion, strange as it seems, was enough to keep the ocean dreaming. Because even in a place where everything is wet, hope somehow remains waterproof. There are whispers of newer generations, too. Modern fish who refuse to let go of the old dream. Young guppies posting imaginary photos on non-existent social networks, tagging each other in captions like #StayDry, #BubbleGoals, #Moisture, Issa Mindset. Old turtles scroll through these fictions slowly, not because they're interested, but because they can't remember how to stop scrolling. Somewhere, an eel starts a motivational seminar titled Think Dry, Swim High. Nobody attends, but the confidence remains. A group of sardines forms a startup called Hydro Chick, promising luxury dryness for the modern fish. Their first investor is a confused crab who pays entirely in shells. The business collapses instantly, but a rumor spreads that they almost succeeded. And in the ocean, almost is just another word for legend. Meanwhile, far above, humans continue to invent things that solve problems nobody had. Apps for sleep, hats for cats, fridges that text. And somewhere, if you listen close enough, the sea itself seems to laugh softly. Because the ocean knows, the line between brilliance and nonsense is as thin as the film on a bubble. Maybe that's why fish never stopped trying, even after failing for millions of years. They weren't chasing dryness, they were chasing purpose. To imagine the impossible, to dream of the absurd, to swim against the tide of logic. That is what makes existence quietly beautiful. Perhaps that's the secret. Fish don't use umbrellas, not because they can't, but because they once did. They tried, failed, and found peace in the surrender. They realized something we often forget, that not every question needs an answer, and not every dream needs to work. Sometimes the act of dreaming is the entire point. So the ocean moves on, filled with the laughter of its mistakes. Each wave a memory, each current a story, each fish a soft, forgetful philosopher drifting toward tomorrow. And if someday you stand near the shore and watch the rain fall into the sea, you might notice how the ocean doesn't resist. It welcomes every drop as if reuniting with old friends, Because in the end, to be a fish is to understand something deeper than survival. It is to live without irony, to swim through absurdity, and to realize that even nonsense can be peaceful. The fish, the fashion, the umbrellas, the dry dreamers, the philosophers, they were all just ripples in an endless gentle joke told by water to itself. And that perhaps is the ultimate truth. To laugh at logic, to float in foolishness, and to find calm in the uselessness of it all. That's why fish don't use umbrellas. Because somewhere long ago they already tried. And in failing, they finally understood what it means to be perfectly, peacefully, wet forever. After the collapse of Dr. Shelbert T. Moist's proud but soggy dream, the ocean fell into an age of quiet bewilderment. Centuries, or maybe just a really long nap, passed. Fish went back to doing their usual things, forgetting why they swam into a place, pretending to understand currents, and holding existential staring contests with sand. But still, curiosity never truly dies underwater. It merely floats slower. And so, out of nowhere, one day a strange thought bubbled up from the deep. If rain falls into the ocean, does it even count as rain? That single question shook the watery world harder than a submarine disco. Soon, every coral corner echoed with confusion. Sea cucumbers pondered. Jellyfish jiggled nervously. Even clams, normally the ocean's introverts, peeked open slightly to listen. What began as idle curiosity soon exploded into what historians later named the Great Fish Debate. It all started at a coral formation that coincidentally resembled a conference table. There, under a flickering patch of sunlight, gathered the greatest aquatic minds in marine history, though that's not saying much. They included philosopher fish, self-proclaimed thought leaders, and one suspiciously large shrimp who kept claiming to be an idea consultant. The event was hosted by the esteemed Professor Gilliam Bubbleford III, a retired anchovy whose head was 60% mustache. He began with the gravity of someone who has clearly spent too much time underwater. Fellow aquatic entities, he announced, we face a paradox. If water falls into water, has anything truly fallen? The crowd gasped, partly in awe, mostly because a swordfish accidentally poked a jellyfish. Order was restored after some apologetic bubbles, and the debate officially began. First to speak were the rain realists. They argued passionately that rain was still rain, even if it ended up in the sea. Each drop is unique, shouted a trout wearing imaginary spectacles. Each drop dreams of individuality before merging with the collective wetness. Deny the droplet, and you deny the dream. Across the coral, the moist minimalists rolled their eyes, or whatever the fish equivalent of that is. Their leader, a cynical tuna who once read half a philosophy book, countered, rain? Illusion. Overrated sky juice. It's just gravity showing off. Then came the hydroskeptics, a faction so radical they didn't believe in water at all. Prove it exists, demanded a confused pufferfish. How do we know this isn't just very moist air? Their theory collapsed seconds later when one swam into a rock and apologized for bumping into reality. The debate raged for hours, or maybe days. Clocks mean nothing underwater. Jellyfish fainted dramatically, eels tangled themselves into punctuation marks, and one crab set up a snack stall selling ethically sourced plankton. Meanwhile, the octopus stenographer, hired to document the event, gave up halfway through and started drawing flowers instead. His art later sold at auction for 3 shells and a promise. Dolphins hovered at the edges, Laughing, they began placing bets using seashells on which philosopher would run out of logic first. None did, not because they were brilliant, but because they simply forgot their arguments halfway through and restarted them. At last, Professor Bubbleford raised his fin for silence. "My friends," he declared, "we are not debating rain. We are debating existence. If the ocean does not know when it is being rained upon, does that make it ignorant or enlightened?" The crowd applauded politely, unsure if it was deep or just damp. Then, from the back, a timid sardine named Kevin lifted his fin and asked, "What if umbrellas are just upside-down boats?" The entire sea went silent. It was the kind of silence you could almost hear. For a single glorious moment, all minds expanded, then immediately deflated when someone asked, "Wait, what's a boat?" And thus, history repeated itself. Kevin's idea, however, refused to die. Over the next few months, the ocean saw a strange new trend: boat heads. Fish began wearing tiny boat-shaped hats made from seashells, coral chips, and misguided optimism. It was chaos. A crab tried to patent the idea but couldn't spell patent. A starfish opened a boutique that only sold disappointment. And one ambitious eel trademarked the phrase "boathead" and sued everyone, including himself. When the fad finally sank, it left behind a legacy. Fish had learned that imagination, while powerful, is also very dumb. Still, out of this nonsense grew something incredible: the first era of underwater academia. Coral universities popped up everywhere. Professors wore robes made of seaweed and argued about subjects like advanced floating theory, the ethics of being slightly damp, philosophy of unnecessary movement, and the popular elective Intro to Pretending You Understand Currents. None of these institutions were accredited. Most didn't even have roofs. But they had passion, an unstoppable, wet kind of passion. The greatest masterpiece of this era came from a philosopher clam named Clementine Deepthought. She wrote a 200-page thesis titled "On the Futility of Dryness." Every page was blank because, of course, ink dissolves underwater. Critics called it a revolutionary statement on the meaninglessness of effort. Meanwhile, deep in a secret reef, descendants of Dr. Shelbert T. Moist formed the Institute of Precipitation Studies. Their goal: to invent a new kind of umbrella that didn't protect from rain, it created it. They dreamed of personalized rain clouds so every fish could feel special. Their invention worked perfectly for 3 seconds before exploding into smaller clouds and raining on everything equally. Equality triumphed, but so did irony. Still, their failures inspired the artists. Squids began releasing bright ink clouds into the water, calling the movement post-moist expressionism. Critics called it profound. Collectors bought the art. 10 seconds later, it dispersed completely. But no one complained, because meaning is temporary, and so are squids. And yet, for all the progress, one truth stayed the same. No fish, not a single one, ever used an umbrella. They built them, argued about them, wore them as hats, even worshipped them, but never once opened one. Some said they feared what would happen. Others believed it was destiny. A few whispered that maybe, just maybe, the real reason was simpler. Fish don't have thumbs. Whatever the cause, the mystery remained like an unpaid tab at a sea bar. Why reject something so simple, so human, so magnificently pointless? Perhaps, the philosophers later concluded, the answer lies not in science or logic, but in boredom. Because when you live forever surrounded by water, Maybe the one thing you don't need protection from is the rain. An umbrella doesn't just block droplets, it blocks the sky. And the ocean, vast and ancient, has always hated boundaries. And so, when the great fish debate finally ended, there was no winner, no resolution, just one universal feeling. What were we talking about again? Professor Bubbleford retired soon after. He wrote his memoir, I Was There and It Was Wet. It sold 12 copies, all to dolphins who found it ironically brilliant. Kevin the Sardine went on to start a motivational speaking tour titled Think Like a Boat. No one understood him, but everyone respected the confidence. Generations later, when the tides shift just right and the moon hums low over the waves, some say you can still hear whispers beneath the surf, the echoes of fish philosophers still debating pointlessly. If rain falls into the ocean, they ask, does the ocean get wetter or just more dramatic? No one knows. No one cares. And maybe that's the truest wisdom of all. Because fish, in their infinite foolishness, have mastered something humans never could. The art of letting stupidity float peacefully. Forever. After the great fish debate finally drowned in its own confusion, the ocean returned to peace. Coral universities shut down, the philosophers floated away into quiet obscurity, and Professor Bubbleford retired to a lonely reef where he wrote sarcastic letters to himself about the decline of intellectual standards. For a while, everything was calm again. Too calm. And as history always proves, when life gets calm, imagination gets itchy. A new generation of fish emerged, sleeker, shinier, faster, and definitely more sarcastic. They didn't want to float through life like their ancestors. They wanted something more. They looked toward the surface, toward that strange, shimmering ceiling of the world, and wondered what life was like up there, beyond the bubbles. They saw the shadows of birds gliding across the sunlight and thought they were sky gods. They saw boats and believed them to be giant turtles who had mastered the art of real estate. But the most fascinating thing they saw, the thing that kept them awake at night, blinking their fishy eyes, was humans. Humans, those bizarre land creatures who walked upright, wore mismatched colors, and built dry shelters called houses. To the fish, those houses looked like rectangular coral that had completely lost its personality. But humans seemed proud of them. They stayed dry on purpose, which, to a fish, was the most rebellious thing anyone could possibly do. Thus began what the ocean historians now call the era of land envy. At first, it was harmless curiosity. A few fish started imitating what they imagined walking must look like. They lined up along the sandy bottom and took turns lifting one fin, then the other, while pretending the floor was land. Other fish stared in awe, whispering, greater than, behold evolution in progress. One overly ambitious flounder even declared himself mayor of the seabed and started collecting taxes from passing shrimp, the currency being sand. He was immediately overthrown by an angry crab who demanded better infrastructure. Soon the trend spread faster than gossip at a coral salon. Swordfish started calling their fins arms. Jellyfish formed fashion clubs to debate which shade of transparent was in style. Starfish invented yoga, which, in their case, was just lying there doing absolutely nothing but calling it spiritual. The ocean was buzzing with imitation. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A dolphin found a waterproof camera dropped by a tourist. That single object revealed the full-color truth of the land world. There were trees, cars, umbrellas, and something mysterious called Wi-Fi, which no fish could pronounce but all claimed to understand deeply. Humans didn't swim, they stood. They wore shoes. They held coffee cups and walked around pretending to know where they were going. And they had umbrellas, not just for rain, but apparently for drama. To the fish, this was the pinnacle of civilization. Soon the ocean was filled with new clubs and cults. The dry dreamers, fish who believed moisture was overrated. The finfluencers, who posted motivational bubbles like, "Stay dry, stay fly." The United Wet of America, because every movement needs a slightly patriotic name. Weekly meetings were held where everyone agreed on one thing. We need umbrellas. There was just one tiny problem. No one had any idea how to make one. The first attempt was heroic and catastrophic. A crab engineer built an umbrella from seashells tied together with kelp. It looked magnificent for exactly 3 seconds, then sank under its own ambition. Next came the octopus inventors. They trapped air bubbles in ink and declared them proto-umbrellas. The prototypes lasted about 2 seconds before bursting dramatically and turning the entire reef blind for an hour. But the movement couldn't be stopped. Dolphins began giving motivational speeches about thinking above the surface. Their leader, Tony Dolphin, released a self-help bestseller called Swim and Grow Rich. It became the ocean's first viral sensation, convincing thousands of fish that true success was just a few waves away, in the shallows. Of course, imitation always comes with a price. Schools started closing down because students became content creators. Clownfish stopped telling jokes and started hosting serious TED Talks about the psychology of laughter. Even sharks began writing emotional blog posts titled "Not All Predators." The turning point came with a bold event, the Great Dryness Festival. The idea was ridiculous but revolutionary. A full-scale celebration of everything human: shoes, umbrellas, neckties, awkward small talk, all held completely underwater. The festival began with a grand parade. Seahorses wore ties, turtles carried briefcases, and eels slithered around pretending to be electrical cables. Above them floated a giant banner that read, "Embrace the dry." Unfortunately, nature had other plans. A sudden current swept through the crowd, turning the decorations into a seaweed explosion. The banner twisted itself into something that accidentally read, "Greater than eat the dry," which, honestly, confused everyone but made for great marketing. Despite the chaos, the spirit of imitation didn't die. The fish built umbrella-shaped monuments. They composed emotional songs like "Somewhere Above the Waves." They even created an online platform, though, naturally, no one knew what online meant. Through all of it, one tiny goldfish named Leonard watched silently. Leonard wasn't like the others. He didn't care for fashion or fame. He just wanted answers. One day, while swimming near the surface, he found himself staring at a human through the glass of an aquarium. The man was sitting in a cafe, sipping coffee, and holding an umbrella indoors. Leonard was hypnotized. He watched for hours, wondering, why hold an umbrella when it's not even raining? And then it hit him. Humans didn't use umbrellas because they needed them. They used them because they could. It wasn't about weather. It was about control. An umbrella wasn't protection. It was power. A portable roof that said, "I decide how wet I get." Leonard swam home like a prophet. He gathered everyone and shouted, The umbrella is not an object, it's an attitude. The ocean was silent for a moment. Then someone yelled, "Wait, what's an attitude?" And just like that, a new religion was born. They called it Umbrellaism. Its holy text had only 3 sacred lines. 1. Life is wet. 2. Stay cool. 3. Never open your umbrella underwater. Temples were built out of coral shaped like domes. Priests wore hats that looked suspiciously like half-open umbrellas. Every sermon ended the same way. Greater than, may your bubbles rise evenly. But like every religion, Umbrellaism split into factions. Some believed umbrellas were spiritual symbols of inner dryness. Others insisted they should be real physical objects. The arguments became so heated that the ocean temperature actually went up by 1 degree. And everyone blamed global warming. In one final attempt to unite his followers, Leonard announced a great pilgrimage to the shore. Greater than, "We will meet the sky," he declared. "We will look rain in the eye and demand equality." Thousands followed him, shimmering, devoted, completely clueless. They swam until the water thinned, until seaweed became sand, until breathing became optional. And there, at the edge of 2 worlds, the truth struck them like a jellyfish sting. They couldn't survive on land. Their dreams were dry, but their souls were soaked. The waves carried them back, quiet and wiser. Leonard vanished into myth, a hero who tried to make the impossible slightly wetter. His final words, recorded by a passing seagull who immediately forgot them, are still quoted in every philosophy class that doesn't exist. And so, land envy ended, not with failure, but with realization. The fish had looked up, jealous of dryness, only to discover that envy itself was the driest thing of all. Because in the end, fish are not afraid of water. They are the water. And no creature born of rain ever truly needs to hide from it. Centuries drifted by since Leonard the goldfish sank beneath the tides, leaving only bubbles, rumors, and a religion with surprisingly good branding. The scriptures of Umbrellaism faded, temples crumbled, and sermons turned into bedtime stories told by tired sea parents to even more tired sea kids. The ocean grew older, quieter, wiser, and just a little more sarcastic. The era of land envy was gone, but its echo lingered. The fish no longer dreamed of dryness, yet something more dangerous remained. Curiosity. And curiosity, as every self-aware jellyfish knows, is the first step toward doing something incredibly dumb. It started one maybe morning, because nobody wears watches underwater, near the Great Blue Trench. A small guppy named Coralton made an announcement that would, once again, change absolutely nothing but sound very important while doing so. He claimed he had heard a voice from above, not a human, not a whale, but a skyfish. No one knew what that meant. Everyone nodded anyway. The skyfish, according to Coralton's shaky retelling, was a radiant being made of clouds and lightning. A creature who spoke in thunder, laughed in storms, and promised to return one day to unite the wet and the dry. Naturally, the ocean believed him immediately. Soon, the rumor evolved into a movement. Schools of believers called themselves the Cloud Clubs. They held bubble ceremonies, stared reverently at the ceiling of the sea, and whispered prayers like, "O great dampness above, rain upon us with purpose, and may our gills never know the drought of doubt." Skeptics mocked them, of course. Sharks called them bubble-brained cultists. Octopuses held televised debates using 8 microphones each. But strange things began to happen. Raindrops grew louder, storms flickered brighter. Some fish swore they saw moving shapes in the flashes of lightning, giant silhouettes swimming inside the sky. Whispers spread like algae. The skyfish had returned. Then came the great summoning. Thousands gathered near the surface, a shimmering crowd of fins, scales, and completely misplaced hope. Coralton raised his fins dramatically and shouted, "O mighty skyfish, child of clouds, descend and bless us with umbrellas of destiny." The sea went still. The sky growled. Thunder rolled like a whale with indigestion. And then, from the heavens above, something descended. It wasn't divine, it wasn't majestic, it was a plastic bag. But the ocean didn't know that. The glowing reflection, the elegant flutter, the slow descent. To them it was a miracle. They screamed in delight, "Behold, the skyfish returns." The bag landed softly on the waves, majestic as trash could possibly be. Fish circled it for hours, whispering praises, debating its sacred wrinkles. The philosophers called it a trans-dimensional umbrella, the perfect metaphor for faith itself, light, empty, and completely useless. Then the current changed. The divine bag drifted away, and the ocean applauded its mysterious departure. Generations passed. The story of the skyfish became religion, myth, bedtime entertainment, and later, a collectible NFT that nobody could access because blockchains don't exist underwater. And for centuries, the ocean slept again. Until one day, humanity came back. A diver descended, slow, heavy, surrounded by lights and curiosity, the most dangerous combination known to science. Fish swam toward him, whispering in awe, "Is it him?" The skyfish reborn. He floated silently, observing, recording. And then, with perfect dramatic timing, he opened something above his head. An umbrella, bright red, spinning slowly underwater like a mechanical jellyfish with attitude. It didn't make sense. It didn't work. It didn't need to. Because for the fish, it was everything. The prophecy, the legend, the proof that nonsense was real. They stared in holy silence. No one moved. No one breathed, mostly because they don't. And then, just as quietly as he came, the diver closed the umbrella, shrugged, and swam away. That moment lasted forever. The ripples stretched across time itself, carrying one universal realization. Maybe the meaning was never the point. When the waves finally calmed, an old turtle coughed thoughtfully and said, "Maybe that's the lesson." "What lesson?" asked a curious crab. "There was never supposed to be one," said the turtle. "We've spent centuries trying to make sense of water." Maybe umbrellas were just reminders that not everything has to make sense. And that was the last recorded sentence in the history of marine philosophy. The fish returned to their normal routines, swimming, staring, forgetting what they were doing mid-sentence. Life continued, as perfectly meaningless and magnificently wet as ever. The myth of umbrellas drifted away, dissolving into laughter, memory, and the soft rhythm of rain hitting the surface above. And maybe, someday, a little guppy will look up through the ripples and ask again, "Why do humans carry umbrellas?" And if the ocean could answer, it would whisper, "Because they still haven't learned to enjoy being wet." Outro, voiceover style. And that, dear listener, is the completely unnecessary, entirely profound, and beautifully useless tale of why fish don't use umbrellas. If you're still here, congratulations. You've learned nothing, but somehow it feels important, doesn't it? Before you float away like an emotionally confused jellyfish, do the sacred ritual of the modern ocean. Like the video, subscribe, and tap that little seashell-looking bell so it can panic every time we upload nonsense. Because every week we dive deeper into mysteries that make 0 sense and 100% entertainment. From sneezing dolphins to existential crabs in therapy, we're just getting started. So stay curious, stay weird, and remember, some questions don't need answers. They just need views. See you next week, fellow thinkers of nonsense. And until then, stay wet, stay wonderful, and never, ever open an umbrella underwater.